African Americans in prisons. But right after the Civil War, and only 5 years afterwards, we find that something like 33% of the prisoners in this country happen to be African Americans or black. So that it was used for the purpose of controlling. And if we look today at what's happening, and I brought along a graph which will show you that even in our community here, this happens to be Albany, but it's also true of Schenectady and Rensselaer counties, is you can see in terms of the population of Albany County, very few happen to be African Americans. But when you look at what happens when they get to the jails, you find that the percentages of African Americans goes way up. Something like a half of the population in our county jails happen to be African Americans. And then even in the prisons, it's get even worse than that. Right now in New York State, we have something like 55,000 prisoners, and of that number, 85% are African American and Latinos. So the impact of all of that imprisonment is devastating on our communities. If you take something like 25%, and the studies that have been released in the last year, and there have been 4 or 5 of them, that show very clearly that young African American males, 25% of them, are either in prison, in jails, or under the control of the criminal justice system. So when you remove that large number of people from the community, you destroy families, you remove leaders, potential leaders in the community, you destroy the economic system of your particular community. So a whole bunch of things flow from that. And so I'm very much concerned about the impact of the criminal justice system on the African American, Latino, and the poor population of this country. And that's one of the reasons why I started the center, to focus on educating our communities about that impact, providing information and education, and also functioning as an advocate for people who are caught up in the criminal justice system, which is a very complex system to understand. And so we're able to assist people in many, many different ways as they have to deal with the criminal justice system.
And the main thing is self-esteem. Black people need to know, African Americans, we need to know that our race is not inferior to all other races. That's the main thing to get into your head right this moment. Our race is not inferior to any other races.
Right, exactly, and I think that's very important, because I think we point to the percentage of African Americans in prison and say, you know, they must be innately criminal or something. That's not the case at all. We have to look at the policy that guides that kind of incarceration. And we also have to look at the kinds of conditions that exist in communities that would foster criminal activity. However, we also have to understand that African Americans or Latinos are not the people who are necessarily involved in the most criminal behavior. We might decide to incarcerate them, but certainly criminal activity goes on in all segments of our community. Even if we look at the drug war, which is, I think, very, very interesting to look at, we found from studies, and even President Bush has admitted that something like 77% of the drug abuse and drug use in this country is in the white community. Yet, when we look at how the laws are enforced, drug laws are enforced, we find that they are selectively enforced in African American and Latino communities, and those are the people who end up in the system. And because we do not provide a quality public defense, again, a lot of those people end up in the system as well. So it's not that we are more criminal than any other group. It's that we have, unfortunately, developed a criminal justice policy in this country that heavily relies upon incarceration and heavily relies upon selectively enforcing laws in our communities.
And then, you know, our African American young men need to know that, and Latino young men, don't wait in line and think that they're next in line to be incarcerated. It seems like to me they just feel, oh, I know I'm going, you know.
Right, and we've gotten to that point.
It's that the mentality.
Sure.
And just because another race makes you feel inferior, that doesn't mean you have to accept it or believe it, you see. That's where blacks, I feel, we are believing that we're lower. And that's why we're acting this way. Right. We're not lower. Right. We're not lower.
And that's what racism has done in our country. We've internalized that inferiority and come to believe that we are.
Yes.
And we have to get rid of that, because I don't believe, even though we work very hard to eliminate racism in our society, I have to be realistic and accept that we will not get rid of racism. So therefore, we have to do something else. We have to learn how to develop our own self-esteem and how to ward off the effects of racism, so that we survive as a strong people. So I would like to tell everybody that you know, we have to take a leadership role in terms of making and bringing about change in our communities, and not to accept the message that races have given out that we were inferior, because we're not.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Well, you've got a special event coming up on Saturday, May 18th, and at 8:30 in the morning starts. And is that the registration at 8:30?
The registration is 8:30. We kick off the program at 9 o'clock, and we've got some exciting people. We have Alombe Braith, who's coming in from New York. He's heads the Patrice Lumumba Coalition, and he will be giving, I think, a very powerful message.
Speaker?
Yes, he's the keynote speaker. I've heard him. We've worked together in prisons. He's a dynamic man. We also will have a community forum, so that people in the community can come out and speak out on whatever issue they want to regarding the criminal justice system. And then in the afternoon, we have a number of very exciting workshops, one on how the criminal justice system works, one on how to complain about police brutality, especially one on juvenile justice and women in the criminal justice system, and one that looks very closely at the color of our prisons. So I think it's going to be a dynamic and exciting day, and we're going to end up with, hopefully, with an agenda that the community can start working on to bring about some change in how the criminal justice system operates.
That's something. And for further information, you can call Dr. Green at 427-8361. That telephone number again is 427-8361. Now, before we have to wind this up, you know, it makes me feel so, it's moving to see that someone, like you said, you came up from a small town, you had these feelings early in life that blacks were inferior and less educated, and now you've got what you've got. Now you're a married woman, and you were able to combine all of this together. Married woman with a family. You also, you know, tell us about your radio show.
Well, I do a minority forum at WAMC Public Radio. And we've had a lot of interesting guests, and we talk about issues, and I'm very much into issues. I don't get involved in partisan anything, but the issues are important to me, and how we can address them in our community.
That's something. So where do you see this world in the next 5 years, Dr. Green? Where do you see it when it comes to race relations?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I think it's going to be the perhaps the most interesting period in our history, because what we're going to find in the year during the 21st century is that what we've been referring to as the minority population will actually be the majority, and it's going to shift everything, you know. And I think we're beginning to see some of those things happening now. Even the situation that happened in Washington the other night with the Latino population saying, "I want to be recognized as a human being," and then we're going to see more of that. And I think African Americans are certainly going to find that they don't want to be referred to as minority anymore, even though they're not a minority when you consider the world population in terms of the people of color. But even in this country, the people who are of color will have to work together, and they will see themselves and be in positions of being the majority. And that's going to shift and change a whole lot of things. And I think we're unfortunately going to experience a lot of resentment and hostility and growing violence on the part of whites towards people of color, because they're going to feel threatened by being the minority.
Isn't that something? We have 1 minute left. How does Alice Green want to be remembered?
Probably as someone who was very concerned about the condition of African American people and other people of color, and did whatever she could to deal with racism and address it.
That's beautiful. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for
If I
inviting
can
me.
ever help you, you call me.
I certainly will.
All right? I'll be more than happy to do what I can.
Good.
And you come back, will you?
Yes.
Okay. Don't forget, this Saturday, May 18th, the registration starts at 8:30, and it's at the Empire State Plaza Convention Center in Albany, the Capital District Community Conference on Crime and Criminal Justice. It's free, and it's presented by the Center for Law and Justice Incorporated. The focus is education, mobilization, and change. For further information, please call 427-8361. You know something? God created all of us equal. Love one another. See you next week. Thanks for watching.
What a heck of a show we have for you. First, one of the premier social activists of our time in our area, Alice Green. She has a lot to say, and we're going to ask her questions about O.J. Simpson, Reverend Farrakhan, you name it, we'll ask her. And then, coming right up This community is made a lot richer by the presence of Dr. Alice Green. Now, this is a lady who has been in our community and has her eye on two distinct subjects which come together. One of them is criminal justice, the other is race. And she is the executive director of a very important center for social justice here. Now, we wanted to talk to her this week, obviously, because we have two things much on our minds. One of them is the verdict relating to O.J. Simpson and what kind of an impact that has had on our society. And the second, of course, is the Million Man March to Washington under the guidance of Minister Farrakhan. We're going to ask her about both of those things and a lot more. Welcome, Alice.
Welcome. Thank you.
I'm so glad you're here, Doc.
Oh, well, I'm glad to be here.
Let me ask you a couple of questions here first. What is the Center for Social Justice?
Well, it's the Center for Law and Justice.
Law and Justice.
And it's an organization that is community-based, and it deals with issues around crime and criminal justice. Many people in our community do not understand how the criminal justice system functions, and as a result cannot be involved in it, and especially involved in a way that they can perhaps help change policy that affects their lives. So we're involved in getting people to understand the system and to also participate in it in whatever way they think is important.
When Minister Farrakhan called for a million-man march, black man march to Washington, he had everybody raising their hands and promising not to do violence in their communities. What did you think when you saw that?
Well, first of all, I think we have to understand what was going on among the participants there. These were men who had a great deal of experience in their communities. They knew that the biggest problems in their communities was racism and joblessness. That also, that because of those two factors, there was a degree of crime and drugs and violence that was taking place in those communities, and they felt powerless to deal with it. Mm-hmm. And so they were coming together with a great feeling and spirit of unity and making a commitment that they were going to do whatever they could to make sure at least that the violence and the crime was reduced in their communities, even though they might not have the power to change some of the other forces that were there.
Well, now, it was a Day of Atonement. What did that mean?
I think it meant that individuals were coming to say to themselves and to the rest of the people that they were with that, yes, they have not done all that they could have done to make sure that their communities were as safe and the quality of life was as high as it could possibly be. They had not involved themselves in such things as voting. They had not taken seriously their responsibility as parents, perhaps. They had allowed drugs and crime to take over their communities to some extent. And so they were saying, we're going to accept responsibility now for those things that we can change. It might have been true that in the past we've not done all the things that we could have done, and so therefore we're wiping the slate clean, and now we're ready to do serious business.
Do you think that by having all these black men hold up their hands and say, I promise I won't hit anybody over the head or whatever that they were saying, that there was a possibility of real racial stereotyping going on, that it was the black guys who were doing this in most cases?
No, I don't think that they were adding to a stereotype. I think they were simply saying we have to accept individual responsibility for a lot of things that happen in our community. We're not all criminals. As a matter of fact, most of the people who were there at the march were people who were very positive in their communities. These were the activists. These were the educators, the fathers who take care of their children. And don't forget, we're talking about most of the African American men in our communities.
So
not all of them are criminals. They're not the people that the stereotypes say they are.
So were we preaching to the converted in a way?
No, there were all kinds of people there. There were men who didn't have jobs and men who had been involved in crime or drugs. And they were banding together, and the people who had been very, very positive in the community were saying, you know, we understand what you've been going through, and we are